All right. I decided today we'll have a slightly shorter session because I want you to meditate too. You've been pretty much overwhelmed with so much information, so I won't even take a vote. I'll decide. No, I think it'd be better to have this one session just to have things settle down a little bit. It's been a lot of information. And then tomorrow we continue, depending on how exhausted you are. And if you decide in the end you'd rather have that time to meditate, then there's also that option. But today, let's allow for everything to settle a little bit. Okay, great. How did the discussion go? Good? Yes? Yes? Easier today? Okay. Yes, Paul?
Yeah, I'm feeling increasingly confident that Buddhism can inform some of the outstanding gaps in sciences.
Okay.
Especially after hearing you. And during the course of the discussion, I felt this.
Okay.
I think we have some very amazing people, William and from Clarence and so on.
Okay, lovely.
So, if I may, I would like to share two gaps from the literature.
Now
or later.
Later, if you don't mind, when we have the so if you don't mind, we'll have this time of question and answer, and you'll be the first one to share that with everyone. Okay, great.
Is the question supposed to be taken literally as written? The first question, and having a wrong consciousness as object?
No, not literally, as in like, how is anger a wrong consciousness? Yes. So not in the literal Buddhist sense, just in general, how is it a wrong consciousness, right?
All mistakes are mine.
Well, we discussed it before, so it may have come across that way when I said it. So yes, anyway. And of course you can always, what's the word, deviate from, just as suggestions. I think any discussion is great. Okay, great. So, wonderful. If it's going well, then I'm pleased to hear that. Okay. And then we hear later on your questions and so on. All right, so just to make sure, there is no break now. Is that all right with you?
Yes.
No break? Okay. And then if we finish at 5:15, that means 4:45, we'll start question and answer. Does that work? 4:45. Can you remind me?
Yep.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so, as we discussed in the morning, there is a difference between sense versus mental consciousness. They function the same way, as in like something appears to the sense consciousnesses as well as to the mental consciousnesses, and they know their objects. In that sense, they're the same. We distinguish between them from the point of view, first of all, the object. So because the sense consciousness, as an example, can only explicitly, as in like, explicitly know in the sense like it can only know something that appears to it if it is shape and color, that is a visual object, therefore we talk of it as a sense consciousness. That is one reason. Ear consciousness, what appears to it and what it knows, can only be a sound, and so forth. Does that make sense? Okay. Of course other things can appear, and other things can be known, like opposite of da-da-da, but if it appears and it is known by that mind, in the case of an eye consciousness, it's a visual object. In the case of an ear consciousness, it's sound. Okay? If a principal object, so its principal object, in other words, is always visual, in the case of eye consciousness, and so forth. Alright? I didn't get around to do the balance in the ear, the emotion. I didn't get around that. I actually fell asleep. If I just lie down for a second. And that's it. And I also had to do some translation work, so anyway, I didn't get around doing it. I tried to do it in the evening. Okay. So the observed object condition... So that is one difference between sense consciousnesses versus mental consciousness, and of the different consciousnesses. They differ from the point of view of the object. Now, also from the point of view of the causes that give rise to those. What do you need, in other words, to have an eye consciousness? In the case of the sense consciousnesses, so you need 3 causes at least. For the mental consciousness, it's slightly different. For the sense consciousnesses, you need 3 causes, 3 conditions or causes that come together. And each of those 3 is slightly different for each of the 5 sense consciousnesses. Now, we've already heard the first condition is the object itself. There must be a visual object. Without a visual object, you can't have an eye consciousness. Of course, it's hard to imagine that you're in a place where there's no visual object. Okay? But hypothetically, if you were somewhere where there were no shape and color, you couldn't have an eye consciousness. You could potentially have one if the sense power is functioning, but if there were no shape and color, it wouldn't work. So shape and color, they are responsible for the appearance of shape and color. Right? I mean, the fact that something particular, like a vase, which comes with a certain shape and color, or a table, can appear to the eye consciousness. So that is possible because of that object. That it can that there's an appearance of a particular thing. That's only possible through the thing itself. Okay? So that's the first cause. Here it says, so if there were no colors, shapes, sounds, etc., sense consciousnesses could not manifest. Okay. But that is not enough. So it would not be sufficient to only have shape and color or sounds, etc. This is from with regard to the external objects, but then also with regard to the physical basis, like the person who perceives, who has an eye consciousness. There needs to be some physical aspect, and that is described as the sense power, or here the empowering condition. If you describe it from the point of view of one of the 3 causes, the second cause is the empowering condition, which refers to the sense power. In the case of sense consciousnesses, in the case of an eye consciousness, it's the eye sense power. That is the empowering condition. It empowers the eye consciousness to perceive its object. Okay? So here, as it's explained, the traditional way to explain it is the empowering condition refers to a sense power. Okay? It's just a literal translation of the Tibetan word. Sense power in the sense that it basically, empowers or enables the perception from the side of the person. So not the object, but from the side of the person, it enables the person to then have an eye consciousness. In that sense, empowering. The empowering condition refers to the sense power, which is traditionally described to be an inner, subtle physical form. Inner, subtle physical form. Now that's what M mentioned in the beginning. This is how it's traditionally described. So inner, why inner? Because outer and inner, yes. And subtle, because we cannot perceive that. Now, as I said, sometimes in a very traditional sense, some people would say, there's something very, very subtle there. Right? But what does that mean, there's something very, very subtle there? I struggle with that a little bit. We do talk about very subtle forms. Definitely. Very subtle physical objects or physical, forms, as in like in Buddhism, the word form is used to describe something physical. It doesn't mean shape, it just means something physical. Now, when we say something physical, when it's subtle, it's not really sure what that means. For instance, our vows are said to be subtle forms, subtle physicalities, subtle physical entities. Our vows, as nuns, for instance, as monks. So we have something has changed since we took the vow. So what is that? What is that physicality, this physical aspect? I've been thinking about this over the years. It comes up again and again. What can that be? Or what else? What another aspect or another subtle form that they describe is, for instance, very subtle. For instance, when you engage in a physical action with your body, you engage in an action that is motivated, let's say by anger, striking someone, then a very subtle form is created. Physical, like form. I'm so used to using it. It's like something physical. Form just means a physical entity. So a very subtle form is created, and that you carry with you. You carry with you until the circumstances arise for that to ripen into some kind of experience. So the physical karma, according to the Prasangika school, is physical. Physical karma. I mean, actually, it needs to be explained. When we say karma, we mean the action. We mean the actual deed, if you like, of killing someone, for instance, or striking someone. That is called karma. If it's volitional. It's volitional. If it's in a volitional action, I intentionally strike someone with a certain motivation, can be positive motivation, then striking someone can be positive. If it's to help them, to stop them from harming themselves, for instance. But let's take the case of a negative motivation that induced me to strike someone. That action is considered to be negative, and it eventually, unless it is purified, ripens in the form of a similar experience when the circumstances arise. And the question that arises naturally would be, well, how do you get from A to Z? In the sense that A is when you strike someone, intentionally strike someone, and Z is when you experience the result of that. What was in between? What connects those two? And in answer to that, the Buddha explained that it's a very subtle physical form that is left behind. Very subtle physical entity. And that stays with you as a kind of residue. It stays, well, it must be with the mental consciousness, because otherwise, how could it go from one life to the next? Okay? So that's been a bit of it's a difficult issue, and the different philosophical systems within Buddhism explain it slightly differently. In the lower philosophical systems, they never talk of a very subtle form. They say it's just an imprint in the mind. That's easy. But it's easier in the sense of understanding, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's how it works. So in the Prasangika school, they explain it slightly differently, and that is said to be the definitive way in which a physical action ripens, or a verbal action ripens. In both cases, something physical is left. And the question is, what is that? And like I said, for a few years I've been thinking about this. It comes up again and again. And I've also asked some of my teachers, and I discussed it with them. Sometimes I'd ask my teacher, and they give me a certain answer, and then when we be discussing it, the answer may actually change. So I remember at some point we came to the conclusion, well, we do talk about a subtle energy that goes together with the mind. Maybe it's just a form of energy that is also a subtle kind of energy that goes together with the subtle energy of the mind. And so every time we engage in an action, and it leaves a residue, it doesn't get lost, nothing gets lost, so the energy is created. Also, our mind, being based on an energy, every time there's a thought, every time our thoughts lead to a certain action, then that leaves it somehow affects the energy of our mind. Right? And in that way, it accounts for the different experiences we have. That things happen to us at some point, and they seem pretty random, because it's not obvious why this happened to me in that moment, but actually they have their causes in that residue that I've left with the mind maybe many, many lifetimes ago. Okay? And since it's so subtle, it's not like I'm really heavily loaded with these different residues of my physical and verbal actions. No, it's too subtle to really accumulate in a way such, that I'm overpowered. And anyway, it keeps changing all the time. Our actions leave residues, but even these residues are constantly changing. In what way? In what way? They change. Neutral ones, we don't really need to worry about. But oftentimes, when we're very, very angry, when there's strong anger, it may destroy some of the very positive residues. Okay? So, very strong anger, very strong aggression. Less stronger anger destroys less, but strong anger is said to destroy a lot of the positive potential. That's one of the reasons we say anger can be so harmful. It can be harmful in so many ways. We feel miserable as it arises. It destroys our peace of mind. It induces actions that may destroy our relationship with other people, affect other people negatively, and it creates causes for future suffering. But it also destroys a lot of positive stuff we've done in the past. It just does. It's like such a counter force. It's a bit like fire burns certain substances. It's just the nature of anger. But there's a good news. Because positive actions, very loving actions, also destroy some of the negative actions. Okay? So then you don't say destroy, you use a slightly more positive verb, purify. But really it's a kind of destruction. I mean, it's like getting rid of it, basically. That's the beauty of positive actions. So that our residues, our actions of the past, whatever residue was left, it gets altered all the time on a daily basis. On a daily basis, positive actions purify certain negative actions. Usually negative ones are induced by anger and resentment and hatred, where they destroy certain positive ones. So it's a constant change. It's constantly changing. Our karma is not fixed. And of course, when we talk about purification, there are certain practices where you engage in that purification in a very intense way. Where through, and Venerable Droma has been doing those meditations with you. One. And you'll do more of those, where you use that principle or that working of the mind, purifying negativities, in a very focused way, and you can purify a lot of negativities depending on your motivation, depending on your concentration in that moment. But actually you can do that every day. You could actually, there's something called the 4 powers, okay? One very important aspect of purification is regret. And that's common sense. I mean, even in a court of law, if you regret your actions, right, your sentence is usually slightly different from a person who doesn't repent, right? Okay. So that is true. That's a common sense fact. But it's also, the moment there's regret, that negativity loses something of its severity. Okay? So regretting the action. So what you do is like you regret, you generate that regret. And that's already a very powerful way in which you loosen some of the negativities. Secondly, there's a resolve to not do it again. It wouldn't work to say, yeah, I regret it, but I'll do it again tomorrow. So those two are very important. Regretting it, but also I'm trying. Of course, you can't know what's going to happen, and our mind is sometimes, it's difficult to control. We may do the same thing again, but just having the determination to not do it again does affect our action, just as we may wake up early in the morning because we set our inner alarm clock. Similarly, if you have a very strong determination, I will try my best to not do it again. Maybe next time we face a situation that is similar, you may not go right away and do it again. It may take a few seconds, and sometimes the momentum is lost and you don't do it at all. So that's a very important aspect, those two. Okay. And then, of course, also that's one of the power of regret and the power of resolve. Do you call them that? Regret, resolve? Then there's the power of reliance. You rely on a virtuous kind of object, something powerfully virtuous. Now this is a little hard to understand. How can there be objects that are naturally virtuous? There are some. It's said to be something, the power of the object. That's a little hard to understand. That they are, because of the prayers and aspirations of a Buddha, for instance, that the Buddha, just thinking of this Buddha, can be something positive. Just from the side, like if they think of me, there's nothing. If you think of me, there's no virtue. If you think of a Buddha, there's virtue. Because, and actually, of course, to a certain degree it makes sense, if you have positive thoughts towards a Buddha, you have positive thoughts towards other sentient beings. Because a Buddha works tirelessly for the welfare of other sentient beings. So any positive response towards a Buddha indirectly helps others. versus harming a Buddha. If you were to set out harming a Buddha, you would harm all sentient beings. If you stop a Bodhisattva, it's said to be really, really dangerous to harm a Bodhisattva in the sense that this is a being who has dedicated herself or himself to the welfare of other sentient beings. If you harm such a person, indirectly you harm other sentient beings. Kind of makes sense, that logic. There is this kind of logic. But anyway, we do say that it's through the power of prayer, etc., that certain objects are naturally virtuous. So you rely on them. It's like in the faith. So basically you take refuge, for instance, or you entrust yourself in whatever, great compassion, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, whatever you entrust yourself. So with this in mind, you do a particular practice, such as reciting a mantra or doing prostrations or working in a hospital. But you can't do that while you're here. So it's usually mantra recital. So like, if you have a job such as working in a hospital or something that is already benefiting others, I think even if you're, what do you call that? Like a person who goes around and collects the garbage collector? They go around with huge trucks and they empty your garbage.
Garbage man.
A garbage man. I look at our garbage man. Oh my God. I mean, where I live right now, we have to take care of our own garbage. So when I'm with my mom, I'm thinking, oh, so lucky. I only have to walk to the front, drop it in the bucket, and then someone comes and picks it up. Now I look at them and I think, they're so kind. They come to our house and pick up our garbage. And this disgusting stuff, they handle all that. Yeah, I get paid for it, but not much. And it's cold, they're there. It's rainy, they're there. I think garbage men are really... No garbage women so far, I've never seen them. So it's okay to say garbage men. So, garbage men are really, really kind. Every time I see the garbage men, I'm thinking, wow, so kind. I don't have to handle and run around with my garbage, which I do right now. When can I bring my garbage to Mcleod to the garbage or down there? I every visit to Mcleod is combined with like a garbage run. So therefore I really appreciate that. So even if you have a job like that, which is maybe not, I don't know whether there's anyone here, but in case you do, or any other job like being a postman. I mean, we're doing a service, we're giving a service to people. You could actually start your day with the other three, and then your whole job becomes a purification. Right? So don't tell me you have no time to practice Dharma. I mean, Dharma practice is not about sitting in a cave on a meditation cushion. No. You can bring it into your life. If you understand how it works, the most seemingly insignificant action can become very, very powerful. Right? Okay. Anyway, so this is about purification. This is the power of our own mind. With regret, with the resolve to not do it again, and engaging in an action, reliance, of course, entrusting yourself in the form of taking refuge, for instance, and then engaging in an action, whether meaningful or pretty neutral. I mean, reciting a mantra is in itself kind of neutral, unless you have the right kind of motivation. Okay? But you make it positive through the three reliances. It becomes the other three. It becomes a positive action, and in that way, because your mind created the negativity, your mind gets rid of it too. This is so important in Buddhism, this practice of purification. And one of my teachers, he's Geshe Thupten Palsang, I mentioned him on many occasions, and he's a great meditator. And he has many meditator friends. Because he's so nice and humble, everyone likes him, and he's all these meditator friends. So I never get to know these meditator friends, because I don't go and visit them, and that'd be awkward. But I get the stories through him. So that's all I'm interested in. I don't need to socialize and have tea with them. So the thing he always talks about, or many times he talks about it, a meditator faces some obstacles. As in, like, they meditate every day, and their meditation does not change their mind. It's not. It's like they meditate on it again. And you know what's so important? When you meditate, there should be a feeling. There should be something coming from within. It's very important. That is a sign you've really brought it to a level where it affects you emotionally. Even if you fake it, right? Fake it until you make it. So even if you just fake it, you bring out, and that affects you. But sometimes there can be negativities, and those negativities they need to be purified. So all the meditators, they know this. And oftentimes they kind of discuss it, they meet each other and they're like, well, I'm facing a problem in my meditation, I need to do some purification. Okay? And then they engage in purification. And oftentimes when they meet again, then the other person asks, so how did it go with the purification? And then they exchange and they're like, yeah, it's getting better, it's actually getting better. They kind of exchange meditator info. So, as in like, yeah, it's going better. That was really effective. I did this practice and that helped me. Or they may ask one another, like, what works best for you? And they kind of exchange, right? I don't know whether there's a meditator WhatsApp group, but at some point maybe. Right, the Dharamsala meditator WhatsApp group. That you can sign up. No, I'm kidding. But they, they meet and they exchange those. So he's often shared these stories. He gave an example of this person, that person, but basically saying when you feel, you just can't, you don't want to sit down, meditate, you have this obstacle, that, it's like, then it may be a good time to do the purification. And it's not difficult at all. And maybe next time you do it, I don't know when you're planning on doing it. So anyway, that, of course, Venerable Droma has already given you explanation, but then adding on to it, it may motivate you to do this here or to continue doing this here, but also take it with you. Take it with you and your whole day in an office, in a traffic jam. Right? Traffic jam purification. That is so uncomfortable. And we have more and more of those. I mean, not here, not just here, everywhere. And then more and more traffic jams. And again, maybe we'll start doing like the traffic jam purification. Just being in a traffic jam and doing this is not comfortable. It's not anything we strive for, so that's a good way of using that as a purification practice. And every day, if you're lucky, you have 2 hours purification, being stuck in traffic. Right, okay. So this is just the power of the mind. We can use any situation, and depending on our motivation, depending on our intention, motivation, the way we execute the action, it becomes positive. Right? It becomes positive. All right. Okay, so that's really, really important to get that. Then no matter what you do, who you are, your whole life becomes Dharma practice. Okay, all right, great. Now, how did I get there? Subtle forms, that's right. Oh yeah, the subtle forms. Wow, that's a long... Oh, never mind. So, here we talk about these very subtle forms that are I suppose, but I'm not sure, are like this energy. So maybe here, when we say the empowering condition, you have all the aspects that we know about in daily life. I mean, scientists know about everything that is needed to bring forth a perception of an eye, like an eye consciousness. And that subtle form maybe is the energy that goes together with it. I don't know, right? There's definitely some subtle energy that is needed, that is created when all these factors come together, and that would kind of also explain would also account for the traditional explanation. Okay, that meditators have possibly seen, they've possibly picked up on that. I mean, picking up on a person's energy, that's not such a big deal, is it? We hear it again and again. Picking up on something. It's not that you necessarily read their mind, but you pick up on the energy that is created. I mean, when we're nervous, you get butterflies in your belly, right? That's a kind of energy. Tibetan doctors, if you're too excited, you're too stressed out, they talk about lung disease. It's an energy disease. When your energy is moving too quickly, in particular the life energy, they talk of different types of energy in the body, and one is described as the life energy. And then sok means life, lung means energy or energy wind. So when you have solung, and the doctor tells you have solung, you have this life energy disturbance, you're a little bit in trouble. You need to take medicine. So it manifests itself in like you feeling very nervous. You can no longer take coffee, you cannot sleep, you're very agitated. That is when you concentrate too much, when you're too stressed out, etc., and then it may rise. But they have great medicine for that. I've had my share of solung with my studies, so I know. Right? You do a lot of study, you don't know when to take a break, you memorize too long, or you just focus on the text and you stop breathing, You hold your breath because you're like, what? Trying to, so that can lead to that, and right, it's just part of the study sometimes. You need to learn to relax while you do this. Okay. Anyway, the point is here that the energies, you get to know them as you learn about them, like with Tibetan doctors. Like when you have certain diseases, you can pick up on them. There's restlessness. Where does that come from? Because the energies are moving too fast. And of course, acupuncture and all that is all based on that. This idea of energies in the body. Okay. Now, I believe, therefore, that this very subtle power, or subtle sense power they talk about, may be referring to that, which meditators have picked up on. Through their meditative powers, they pick on different energies, and that may have been one. Because what's very important, like anything that is taught in those texts, of course it was taught by the Buddha, but if only the Buddha had taught this, it wouldn't have been as effective as it still is when we hear this. Why? Because there is an unbroken lineage of teachers that have passed on these ideas from the time of the Buddha. This idea of lineages is very important. And this unbroken lineage, they are also beings who experience to a certain degree what the Buddha has taught. So it's not like, for instance, if you take His Holiness the Dalai Lama. If anyone has bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, it is His Holiness. And so he was given the teachings on bodhicitta by a teacher, again who had bodhicitta. So you have this unbroken lineage of beings who actually, what they teach you is no theory for them. It is reality for them. For us, this is theory right now. But please be aware, this is only theory for us because we haven't experienced it yet. But this is why we need these qualified, highly realized teachers, such as the Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and many, many others, who what they teach is no theory, it's out of their experience. They teach out of their experience. It comes from their hearts. So many of those ideas here, I believe they pick up on so much. They have so many abilities to know things. And if I get the time at some point, if you tell you some of the stories, some of the experiences I had myself with lamas who told me things they couldn't have known unless they had clairvoyant powers. Oh, there are thousands of stories. I tell you just one. I had this amazing teacher who was so clairvoyant, unbelievable. Time and again he proved that he was. He was in his 80s. He's passed away by now. His picture's actually right here. I saw it. It's right there. Many, many years ago, in the very beginning, when I was a new nun, I went to see him about a visa. I wanted to go to Nepal to get a student visa. And I asked him, I was helping out at Tushita at the time. That was just, well, a little bit before I started my studies at the IBD. And I helped out, but not everyone could leave at the same time. And so I was only a certain window of time I could leave. So I asked Kittichen Rinpoche to tell me when is a good time to go. Because I knew he had these clairvoyant powers. He was this incredible meditator. He said, you go tonight. And I'm like, no. It was really hot. It was like summer. I didn't want to go right away. But he said, no, if you don't go tonight, you won't get it. And I'm like, all right. And he said, you still should recite a certain mantra. He gave me a mantra. I still have that piece of paper where he wrote down the mantra. So he gave me this mantra to recite, and I was okay. He said I should do it. I did it. So I went all the way to Nepal. It was difficult at the time. There was no train as much as you have now, or the buses that you have now was different. You had to take a train, a bus, and then eventually got to Kathmandu. I got my visa. I got back, and Rajiv Gandhi got assassinated. Borders closed. Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated, and the borders from India to Nepal were closed. And they haven't given a student visa ever since that time. Until to this day, I've not heard anyone getting a student visa from Nepal. I must have been one of the last people to get a student visa. And I don't think he was part of the assassination. Right? He just knew. It was amazing. Right? And I had a 5-year student visa. Whoa. I mean, anyway. So, like, how do you explain that? And that's not the only story. Oh, there are plenty like that. No, I'll get to it another time. Okay. Otherwise, it takes this. The other one is a little longer. Okay, but anyways. So there are stories like that. I mean, you ask other people. You ask Mcleod. There's this incredible monk who's here right now. He's also teaching. If you can catch him, he's really amazing monk. He may not be as well known as, I don't know, Alan Wallace and, some of these people who wrote a lot of books and, of course, some great scholars and so forth. But he's really special. He's really, really special in many ways. Again, I don't have time to go into it. But if you can catch him, he's also got some great stories. He's been around for a long time. Okay? And many others. Okay. But don't tell them I asked them to ask. to ask them for, clairvoyant stories. Okay. Anyway, I'm sure you guys also have some. Venerables also have some. Okay. Anyway, but that's convincing. If you hear these stories, it's really just stories, but why would we be lying to you? And so, in a sense, there's a sense of belief. It's hard to prove it, but just these accounts can be helpful. So the ability of the mind to know, and to know things that go beyond the ordinary, and also knowing these things that are not just theory, like I said, but they actually come from first-hand perception. All right. So going back to the explanation, so the empowering condition being traditionally described as an inner subtle physical form, independence on which the sense consciousness is able to apprehend its object. The sense power and the observed object condition. So in whatever that is, so whatever is necessary, in particular, let's think of the sense power in the sense of like modern science, the eye organ and the retina and all that working together. And when that and the vase and the table exist at the same time and they interact now, in whichever way that takes place, just take the biological explanation for that. So when they have to meet, in Buddhism they say they have to meet. To meet doesn't necessarily mean like, hey, how are you? Let's meet. It kind of means like to come together, basically, to interact. So the sense power and the observed object condition have to meet in order for the sense consciousness to manifest. I should have added have to meet or have to come together, have to cooperate, whatever you want to use, to manifest. In the case of the eye consciousness apprehending the vase, a subtle inner form associated with the eye organ, called the eye sense power, is the empowering condition or the empowering cause that meets with the observed object condition, the vase, and is responsible for the eye consciousness's ability to perceive the vase. So to translate into different words, basically, the on a physical point of view, the eye, brain, and so forth, all of those, after the object has been reflected in the eye, then the physical process takes place. Brain is activated, and that eventually gives rise. So the brain's physical eye sense power, the optical nerve part of the brain, etc. That gives rise to an eye consciousness. If they are not properly functioning, an eye consciousness cannot arise. So as before, if you don't have a visual object, you can't have an eye consciousness. If you don't have a functioning eye sense power, again, you can't have an eye consciousness. You need those two. Okay. And then you need a third condition, which is the immediately preceding condition. That is an awareness that precedes the sense consciousness. There must have been an awareness that was there before. It refers to the consciousness that manifests a moment before the sense consciousness manifests in that person's continuum. For instance, the eye consciousness that apprehends the vase is preceded by an awareness which serves as the cause of the eye consciousness because it is responsible for the eye consciousness manifesting as a luminous and knowing mind. Okay? So, first, the observed object condition was responsible for a certain shape and color to arise. The eye sense power was responsible for the fact that you see a visual object. And the immediately preceding condition is responsible for perceiving something in the first place. If there wasn't a moment of perception before, you can't have a moment of perception now. Does that make sense? So you must have had an earlier moment of perception. Can't perceive something if you earlier didn't perceive something. That is another reasoning for past and future lives. Right? If I perceive something now, a moment before that, I must have also apprehended something. I must have been aware of something. And that awareness can also just come that there was awareness before. Because the function of awareness must always be preceded by a function of awareness. You can't suddenly have an entity engage in that function without a previous moment having done so too. Okay? That's the theory, or that's the, not theory, the concept of Buddhism where this important concept of a consciousness must always be preceded by a moment of consciousness and so forth. Does that make sense? Does that make sense to some degree? No, it doesn't?
Stuff is infinite again.
Yeah, infinity, sorry. Can't get around that. Well, why? Just as a physical object, a physical object performs a certain function, and that function must have been preceded by an earlier moment of a physical object, something physical. Otherwise, you don't get something out of nothing. So, some basic quality, the basic qualities of physical objects, they can only come about if a previous moment gave rise to them that has similar properties. So with the mind, a mind has the basic ability for things to appear to it and for that mind to be aware of them, these objects. So that must have been preceded by a previous moment that had that same ability. Okay? So that is a very important aspect in Buddhism. Okay. All right. So it's a previous moment and it's responsible for the I consciousness right now manifesting as a luminous and knowing mind. If the I consciousness was not preceded by a former moment of such an awareness, it would not be able to manifest as such an experiencing and aware entity able to recognize the vase. Okay? And so in fact our whole life, every moment of our perception is preceded by a former moment. Our entire life. If you start watching the mind, right, you'll get how you can learn to trace back how you got from very peaceful in the morning to extremely resentful in the evening. Right? You can trace it. If you train yourself to become more mindful, to use your mindfulness in the form of introspection, to look at your own mind, then you can learn, first it's shorter periods of time, you can learn exactly how you get from one moment to the next, right? And you can see exactly how I got from a very, as an example, peaceful mind to a very disturbed mind a few moments later. What gave rise to that? And you also come to see the external circumstances are only secondary. It's actually mainly happening in the mind. You can choose to stay calm, if you have that ability, mental ability, or nothing happens and you still explode. It's also possible. Just reflecting on the possibility that something horrible happens can make you very anxious. Right? Fear is it's a very interesting idea because oftentimes it's fear of the different horrible scenarios that could happen. Actually, only one horrible scenario can happen, but you take to consideration 10, it's terribly fearful. I mean, it's scary, terribly scary. So a lot of fear we have is fear of the future. But that comes from the mind because the object doesn't exist. The future doesn't exist right now. So you're fearful right now of something that could happen. There is not even an external trigger. It's really just the mind imagining what would happen and giving rise to fear. So it becomes pretty obvious that our experiences are mainly dependent on the mind. In a sense, that is the only thing that is always with us and the only thing we can actually learn to control. Wow, that's huge. We can control our experiences. We can learn to control our experiences. We can learn to find lasting happiness even in the midst of the most horrific war and so forth. And that's, again, where it's so inspiring if you meet some of those Tibetan masters. Incredible Tibetan masters. People who have been imprisoned for years by the Chinese government. And if you want to know about this, but you don't have a problem with being terribly upset, read this book, Ama Ade. When I read this book, I was crying halfway through to it. She tells Ama Ade, I think she's still alive, but I haven't seen her for a while. She's this elderly Tibetan lady, big lady, fingers, huge fingers. And she was a strong lady when she was younger, and her husband went against the Chinese, I don't know when that was exactly, against the Chinese, and she followed him, and she was imprisoned for 27 years. I think for 20 years she didn't have a shower. She never got to wash herself. She was in the same clothes. And the hardships she underwent, it's unbelievable. She was in a cell with other people, and there was a time in the prisons that were built by the Chinese government at the time when in 1 month 20,000 or 30,000 people died. There was starvation, there was a lot of starvation, and especially in prisons they had no food. And she talks about waking up in the morning and having one corpse on one side and another corpse next to you. Unbelievable suffering. I have never heard an account of so much suffering. And still, she was very compassionate, and she was very much into Dharma practice, and the little food that she received from her relatives, she always shared it. She always shared the little she had. Some would hide it and secretly eat it. She never did that. She always shared everything. And one Lama, when she was finally released, told her that the reason she survived was that she was still practicing generosity. That kept her alive. Really strong lady. Amazing woman. And anyway, so Ama Ade, if you read her book, it is terrible. But the point is, what I'm trying to say is that there's her, so her life story exists. But the other great teachers, Banding Gyatso was another man who was imprisoned, a monk. And His Holiness always tells this story when he says he met a prisoner who'd been in prison for, I don't know who it was actually, for 30 years, again in a Chinese prison. Unbelievable torture, unbelievable suffering that they experienced. In fact, even nowadays in the Chinese prisons, I just heard from a friend the other day, because one of my classmates was recently, when he went back to Tibet and he participated in a protest, was in prison for 8 years. And I heard from someone, he's not well, he's really not well, but he wasn't tortured. And someone told me that the Chinese government now poisons the prisoners. They give them a poison which is very, very slowly working. So they don't die in prison. They get sick in prison, they're released, and they eventually die. So I was like, what is it with my classmate? Did he sleep on the... I first asked, what is it? Did he sleep on the ground? It's like, no, everything was fine. But now he's really sick. So it would make sense. It's so easy. There are certain poisons you give them now, and it takes a few months for them to work. And that's how so many Chinese prisoners die. That would account for it. There's so many Tibetan ex-political prisoners that are really, really sick, even though they weren't tortured. So they say, no, I wasn't tortured. I don't know, I just got sick. Good riddance, right? So it's incredible. It's the cruelty, the stuff that's happening. It's really terrifying. And I hear it again and again from people who still travel to Tibet, and the restrictions and the control, and people always being with you at all times, spies, etc. But even at that time, it was even worse. So there was this one political prisoner, and His Holiness had an audience with His Holiness when he got out. And so His Holiness asked him, so how was your experience? And he was an incredible practitioner. And so His Holiness said, so what happened? He said, it was great. It was a great opportunity. Only one time there was danger. So His Holiness said, oh, so danger to your life? He said, no. Danger, I lost my compassion for the prison guards. What? Right? So he used this opportunity to practice. He never generated anger towards the prison guards. He generated compassion. And these beings, they come out very healthy. Somehow their virtue, whatever happened to them, they come out and they're just as strong physically and mentally. So PTSD, forget it. So these great practitioners, they don't have PTSD, right? we get PTSD if we cannot utilize our mind in that way. And of course, we're just ordinary people. It's hard enough to do it when we're well, when everything goes well for us, right? How hard is it then when everything goes wrong? But usually, this is one we're supposed to practice. It's the hardest times, but I know some people who really do that. I told you about this friend of mine who's in hospital right now, new knee. I mean, everything that could go wrong went wrong for her. And she really used it as practice. She just, no single moment did she lose patience, was unfriendly or unhappy. All the way through, she thought, great purification. What an opportunity. And there she is, so jolly and happy. I call her every night. We talk for a half an hour. Every day she's like, beautiful stories of nice doctors and nurses and everyone's so friendly. Not even for a moment she's been depressed. And everyone says that around her. They're like, wow, she's so nice to be around. She's never complaining, never whining. Okay. So the thing is, these examples, if you see that, we can all do this. There's no difference. We all have the same mind. Slight differences, but those are superficial. From deep within, we all have the same essence. Okay? So this I find is most important. This is what I need you to know. I don't care if you don't take home these 3 conditions. Right? It's part of the study, of course, and it's good to understand it. It makes it complete. But in the end, what you need to take with you is the means to utilize your mind in that way. Okay? Anyway, the reason I started talking about this is when you start watching your mind, you get to know what happens exactly, how each moment gives rise to the next, gives rise to the next. And once you know that, you know where to stop it when it goes out of hand. You can learn to say, okay, now I'm entering a dangerous area. I better stand back. Right? Okay, great. Anyway, going back to the simple explanation, simple. Observed object condition, empowering condition, plus a former moment of perception, that enables a present moment of eye consciousness to perceive its object. Okay. So, therefore the 3 causes of the eye consciousness are the observed object condition of an eye consciousness is shape and color, the empowering condition is the eye sense power, and the immediately perceiving condition is the awareness that immediately preceded the eye consciousness. For the ear consciousness it's sound, blah blah, and so forth. Okay. Now, with regard to those sense consciousnesses, also what we need to know is that they're not always present. They're not always present. They lie dormant while sleeping and fainting, and will be replaced by subtler awarenesses, which will be explained below. Okay, so while sleeping, fainting, any time when we're not conscious, what we describe as not unconscious, right? Unconscious, of course, is a little misleading, the term. It doesn't mean we are not conscious, but it means that the consciousnesses that are coarser, they are not there. Doesn't mean that a subtle consciousness is not there. And also subtler awarenesses that arise while sleeping, fainting, or at the time of death. But because they are always present, since they're always present while we're awake, they have a monumental influence on our life. Huge influence on our life, right? Sense perceptions. In fact, we say, as humans, we live in what's called the desire realm. Right? Our lives are governed by desire. Okay? It's called the desire realm. So everything is about desire. And mainly our desires as ordinary people are directed towards the sense objects. Right? We crave beautiful sights. Sunrise, sunset. Right? We crave beautiful sights. A garbage bag makes us angry, possibly. Unless you're like my friend, I have an artist friend. She sees art even in a garbage bin. She's like, well, that's art. That's actually quite helpful. When she walks past some garbage, she's like, wow, art. Alright, so we crave beautiful sights, pleasant smells, pleasant sounds, right, and so forth. And when we don't get them, we get upset and possibly angry. So our lives are very much governed by our desire for pleasant sense objects and avoiding unpleasant ones. Okay. All right. So they have a monumental influence on our life, these sense consciousnesses, but they also have, of course, they have a very important function. They provide us with the information of the objects around us and compose our entire sensory world. Okay? They are our access to the world. Because without them, I mean, you all know the story of Helen Keller, right?
Mm-hmm.
Helen Keller?
No.
She was deaf. Blind and deaf. Blind and deaf. She was blind and deaf. This amazing lady who was born in the 18th century, wasn't it? It's actually a book on her. So she had this incredible teacher who taught her to deal with her blindness and her deafness. But if you imagine, like, not only blind but also deaf, that's like the worst two sense. It's terrible to be deaf. It's terrible to be blind. So much easier if you can't taste, for instance, or you can't smell. And then having both. So, like, how limited you are, how kind of like enclosed you are, as in like missing out on so many things. So actually, with these 5 sense consciousnesses, all our learning was possible through the 5 sense consciousnesses. So they're very important, of course. From the point of view of Dharma practice, sense consciousnesses are extremely useful because they enable us to read and listen to Dharma teachings, communicate with our teachers, debate, and so forth. Nonetheless, due to our attachment and craving for sense objects, they obstruct our concentration when engaging in meditation practice and induce various different afflictions, right? Oh, I wanted some chocolate cake, I can't concentrate now. Okay. The perception of pleasant objects induces attachment, the perception of unpleasant objects induces anger, and the perception of neutral objects induces ignorance. I mean, if it induces anything, then just if everything is just pleasant and neutral, we're not tending in either direction. We're just kind of becoming indifferent. So here, ignorance in the sense of just indifference. Right? Anger, so clear, isn't it? It's so funny. It's so classic. Because we're not used to loud horns. And when you see people like Westerners who come newly to Mcleod guns, and suddenly like behind them, there's like someone going, "Baff!" And then this Westerner goes, "Ah!" It always makes me laugh, getting so angry. And sometimes they stay in the middle of the road and don't move. And the horn is honking, of course. But it doesn't help. They're just honking the horn and that's it. And if you watch like the local people, they're used to this. It's not a big deal, right? It's just part of it. And in fact, I'm glad they do it. I think it's potentially dangerous if they didn't honk a horn, because with the speed they sometimes come, I'm not prepared. I'd be probably run over. So I'm glad they warn me from afar. I always know how far they're away when I have to step to the side. So I'm not used to it. I don't mind any longer. But I definitely see these people who just newly arrived. Their clothes still very clean and everything. And sometimes I'm in the car that's honking. I don't honk when I'm not driving. But, they have these super loud horns. It's not like they're trying to be, they're just super loud. They're just louder than we're used to. Walking in front of the street. So much anger there, right? And of course, attachment and so forth. When the song comes on and suddenly they start kind of dancing. It's also attachment there, part of desire. And not necessarily that it's negative, but there is that reaction, right? Or the food is really good, I want more. Order 3 of the cakes because they're so good. So attachment, right? So anyway, pleasant feelings, pleasant experiences on the sensual level, just on the sensual level, give rise to attachment and desire, and negative ones give rise to anger. Now, some people like to blame the feelings. Don't blame the feelings. They're not the cause. Feelings are not the problem. The problem is the deepest misapprehension of reality. The feelings are just what triggers it. And if it wasn't the feeling, something else would trigger it. Okay? So the feelings are not the issue. Of course, sometimes it's helpful to avoid the feeling. Okay? This is why monks and nuns are in a situation where they avoid certain stimuli. That doesn't mean, first of all, everyone has to become a monk or nun, and it doesn't mean that you have to avoid them forever. At some point, the goal is to overcome desire and so forth altogether by removing the misapprehension, and then it doesn't matter whether you're celibate or not, it doesn't matter. But our situation is such, the reason we become celibate is actually not because there's anything bad about being in a relationship and so forth. No. The reason is that it becomes very distracting. It can be very destructive. Because, of course, these are very strong emotions, and depending on the degree of pleasure you get out of it, the stronger the attachment, the more distracted you are. So it's only to remove some of the distractions. In fact, becoming a nun means you have a lot of freedom within a certain framework. You see, having no hair, there's a lot of freedom. It doesn't seem like that. If you don't want to cut your hair, it seems like terrible, it seems like torture. But once you've gotten rid of your hair, so much freedom. You never have a bad hair day. No, I'm just kidding. But no, this is true. Like, it's so easy. You take no time. You don't spend any time. You don't need to worry about a haircut or a hairdresser appointment. All that is gone. It's a true liberation. And even with the clothes, fashion is not an issue. It's 3.5 meters every 10 years. Give it to the tailor, right? And you put on weight, you lose weight, no problem. It all fits in. Does it remove vanity? No, it doesn't. Because I keep saying it. I've mentioned that before, but in a different context. So many shades of maroon. And everyone has their preferred kind of shade. So of course that is still there. Just changing the external circumstances doesn't get rid of certain afflictive emotions. However, it makes things easier and provides a space and a freedom from within you can work easily. Right? Certain decisions you don't have to make. So if you use then your time spiritually, use it well. If you don't, it's just an easy lifestyle with some restrictions. Which, if you don't utilize it well, you may actually miss those restrictions and you no longer remain a nun or monk. So it's considered to be really important that you do, of course, what comes along, not just the external and the vows, but to also live accordingly. Otherwise, the desire takes over and you want to be, in a relationship and so forth, everything, and you can't go on. All right, so just to tell you this, that in the case of monks and nuns, you avoid certain factors because if you had them, they would overwhelm you possibly. And this is just a personal decision. For some people it's not appropriate, for some people it is. So, therefore, avoiding certain aspects is almost avoiding those feelings. Not saying that feelings are bad, but avoiding certain feelings and then working with those feelings that are easier to cope with, remaining away from them, and as part of the practice, reducing your afflictions until you're able to totally eliminate them. Does that make sense? So avoidance of certain triggers or stimuli, that's okay, to a certain degree. But the goal is not avoidance forever. Okay? It's just until... It's a bit like in everyday life, like if you're not well, you may have to avoid certain foods until you get better, and then you can eat them again. So the goal is not to forever refrain from those foods, from these food types, but rather for the time being, until you can totally cure yourself from the disease, to stay away from them. May not be anything wrong with them. Maybe certain fruits, even fruits are healthy, but certain fruits may harm you for now. You avoid them until you're ready to eat them again, or you're healthy enough. Similar idea. Okay. But anyway, in terms of feeling, this is an important explanation how feelings give rise, of course, to afflictions. I mentioned those briefly before. Misapprehension of reality, an exaggerated sense of self and my happiness. And when happiness arises, right, then how attachment comes forth, etc. Exaggerating the object that provides me with this happiness, seeing happiness within that object, believing that happiness is something intrinsic in that person. It's intrinsic in that person providing me with happiness, and not being able to let go. Or anger in the opposite case. So it's feeling that triggers those. All sense consciousnesses are direct awarenesses. So they're direct. Now this is a little hard. For they directly and nakedly experience their principal objects of engagement. Nakedly, directly. What does that mean? That is a very difficult idea. For some of you, you're already used to it. I've heard you talk about it. So from what you said, it becomes clear. You know what this means directly. But for those who it's not clear, please pay attention and be patient with yourself, because it takes a while to understand this. However, even though sense consciousnesses have the advantage of being able to freshly and nakedly experience their objects. So in other words, it's right in front of you. The object is right in front of you, and you freshly perceive it. It's not like a memory where the object is kind of frozen in time. No, you freshly experience it. You freshly experience it with all the details, as opposed to just thinking about it. And how that thinking process, how that takes place, I'll explain. They're able to freshly and nakedly experience their object as they're right in front of us, with all their details, right? With all the different color aspects, all the different sounds, the varieties of the song, all that we're able to take in, or to some certain degree, we get that. But they're limited at the same time, because they're limited as they can only experience specific objects, such as shape, color, sound, etc., that are in relative close proximity and exist in the presence. And even then, it's just a split second later that we perceive them, but at least they have to exist at this present moment for us to perceive them. If they're not in a relative close proximity, if they're not there right now, we can't perceive them. So in that way, our sense consciousnesses are limited. Furthermore, sense consciousnesses are able to incontrovertibly know their objects of engagement, but they're not able to analyze, interpret, classify, judge, or label these objects. Can't do that. They merely directly realize them and provide us with the raw data. Data? It is the mental consciousness that is able to analyze objects, reflect on them, and so forth.
Did you say the opposite yesterday?
No.
The sense consciousness immediately labels
No.
pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral.
No. The sense consciousness experiences pleasure or displeasure, but it doesn't label. It's because it just experiences. It experiences. There's with the eye consciousness comes a pleasant feeling. That's it. Because previously we may have mentally associated the object with something pleasant. Okay? If you hear long enough or often enough that this food is good for you and you really want to eat it, when you see it, then there's a pleasant feeling, for instance. When you see the shape and color of that food, there's a pleasant feeling due to the mental labeling that took place before. All right. Sure. Okay, page 13. What is today? 22nd?
Yeah.
66. Are we at a good average?
No.
Not really. Okay, let's go on. Got 5 more minutes to question and answer. The mental consciousness can apprehend any phenomenon of the past, present, and future. Mental consciousness, past, present, future. No limit. It can cognize phenomena other than the 5 sense objects, such as subtle impermanence, subtle change in each moment. It can perceive the mind. The sense consciousnesses cannot perceive the mind. It can perceive permanent phenomena, directly at least, cognize them. Okay, the sense consciousnesses can do permanent phenomena too. Actually, that's not a good example. Hence, the mental consciousness does not depend on an observed object condition and a physical empowering condition. It doesn't need those factors. So mental consciousness doesn't need an external object present right there in relative close proximity. It doesn't need an object that's in the present. It doesn't need a sense power. Not necessary. Not required. It only needs it depends on an immediately preceding condition. Further, it is always present, even at the time of deep sleep, fainting, or death. It's always there. That's why you utilize your death. Death is considered really important in Buddhism. We find it so scary in the West. It's put out of the way. We don't discuss it. This is our disadvantage in the West. That we can just push death out of the picture. Birth, yeah, bring it on. How nice. Pictures of newborn babies, great. But how often do you see corpses? Like corpses, being able to see them, look at them. It's totally out. This is such a big problem because we have to die. We're going to die one day. And no one teaches us how to get used to it. Unless we're really close to it and then we may be in a hospital where a lot of people around us die. But then it's just depressing and it's very difficult for us to cope with it. So actually it's so important to think about our own impending death daily. That's part of Buddhist practice actually. To always reflect upon our own impending death. What comes first, death or tomorrow? We just don't know. And we have an innate sense. When I said we perceive phenomena as permanent, that also refers to the sense of permanence from the point of view, I'm not going to die. I'm too busy. I won't die tomorrow. I'm really busy. I've had a whole day planned. I don't have time for dying. It feels like that, right? I mean, I'm making a joke out of it. But we have a whole day planned. Like death, I'm not thinking that because I have all this planned. I have a full schedule tomorrow. So I cannot consider death. Our lives in the West are very busy. And death just doesn't fit in. We're not exposed to it as we used to be in the past. When you lived with, 3 generations under one roof. And grandmother, it was time, or grandfather, was so the person would die at home, would be accompanied by relatives, and then when the moment of death arrived, would be washed and prepared for burial. Right? That doesn't happen nowadays. Nowadays, when you're brought to a hospital, you die there, and you're not allowed to see the person. You're not allowed to see the corpse. They kind of take it away, and then it's in a coffin, right? If you have an open, sometimes like in the US you have that. I don't think in Germany we have this open coffin thing. So a friend of mine, her father died. She said she didn't get to see him. She wanted a little bit of ashes. He was cremated, and they wouldn't give her the ashes. They wouldn't give her the ashes. Yeah, they wouldn't give it to her. She wanted to take some ashes and bring them to to India. Didn't give them to her.
In Holland, we wash family members still.
You still wash them.
We even put them in the oven.
You put them in the oven? That's great. That's nice.
Yeah.
But Holland is much more liberal in so many ways.
It has changed. It was like this, and now
it's changed. Very good. Because it's such a healthy way to get used to death, to say goodbye to that person. And why not handle a dead person? What's the problem? I mean, of course, if there's disease, it is hygienically a problem. But other than that, it is so important to get in touch with our own death, etc. So therefore, and more than that, to prepare for your own death. There are meditations that you do where you visualize on a daily basis how your mind grows subtler and subtler. And you do these meditations such that when you're ready, when death comes, you can go through these meditations and you're very actively present. Right? Usually when unexpected things happen that we're not familiar with, because we don't die every day, so we get fearful. There's fear. To avoid fear, to be totally calm, you go through these meditations. In fact, His Holiness the Dalai Lama says he dies 3 times every morning and 3 times at night. Because there are these meditations, you do them 3 times in the morning and 3 times at night. Right? So he says even more, sometimes 8 times a day. So they prepare for their own death, as in like going through these stages that happened when you die. There are certain visions that you have, certain stages. If we have the time, I'll go through some of them. It's okay to explain them, even though if you don't have a tantric initiations, His Holiness the Dalai Lama explains them. I don't see any problem. It's widely available, those explanations. So if we get time, which I'm not sure, so we can go through them. And it's just a matter of becoming familiar with the unavoidable. And then be ready, mentally ready, calm, expecting, aware, and move on. And have a positive rebirth, right? Which is important. I mean, maybe we be enlightened in this lifetime, great. But if we're not enlightened in this lifetime, what comes first? Enlightenment or the next life? The next life, right? And so, if you're highly realized and you already have bodhicitta and great compassion, maybe that preparation is not necessary because you already have bodhicitta at all times, and even in your deep sleep you have bodhicitta. But you can pretty much check your dreams. Do you have always bodhicitta in your dreams? Great. If not, a lot of work to be done. Because if bodhicitta really was deeply part of you, you would, in your dreams, you would never ever engage in an action that would go against your mind of wishing to be enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. Our dreams are very good indications. Right? Because sometimes stuff and anger comes up, and it's not that dreams are that important, but I think it shows that oftentimes we still have to work on certain emotions because they come through in our dreams. All right. Anyway, so therefore, very important to prepare for our own death.
Do you want to start questions?
Pardon?
Do you want to start questions?
Yes, I'll ask. Okay, great. All right. Questions. We have half an hour for question and answers. Yes, Nikita? Oh, no, wait. Sorry, Bao wanted to say something about it. Yes.
So it seems, at least to me, that there's a real possibility of how contemporary sciences can be informed by certain perspectives from Buddhism. I'll mention three, one each for sense consciousness, body consciousness, and mental consciousness.
Okay.
The motivation for sense consciousness is this statement here that hence if a person's physical eye organ, the optical nerve or the part of the brain that facilitates visual perception are not functioning properly and eye consciousness cannot manifest. So it seems that how different parts of our visual system work and how eye consciousness operates, there is an intimate connection between the two.
Yes.
So here's the first thing. All our retinas, and for this, right now, we do not have a complete scientific account. No complete scientific explanation is available for this, and this is where I think this perspective of sense consciousness can contribute. So each of our retinas, all our retinas, have a spot called the blind spot, where there are no photosensitive receptors at all.
Okay.
So when I'm looking at an object, there should be an area on the object, there should be a spot on that object that corresponds to
that blind spot
on my retina that we should not be able to visually perceive. And yet, when I look at that board, for instance, I'm able to visually perceive every single spot on that board. Right?
Yes.
So how can I don't know how, but it seems to me that the notion of sense consciousness can really help contemporary sciences come up with a complete scientific account of how this happens. How is it the case that our mind can fill that gap? And so this is as regards sense consciousness.
Okay.
As regards body consciousness, now this is from a particular section of population. But there are certain people who have this inexplicable urge, a secret urge, as they describe it, to amputate their limb.
Oh,
yeah.
That sounds like a terrible urge.
They're perfectly normal people in all other respects of life. Job, family, and socialize, and discuss different things and so on.
Okay.
In fact, this is illegal in the US, so people go to amputate your...
Yes, it makes sense that they make that illegal.
People travel to either Canada or Mexico, and they actually get their arm amputated, and they are, as it is said, I heard one neuroscientist saying, that they are happier when they get their limb amputated.
Interesting.
So they travel to Canada or Mexico.
Okay, yes.
So here, the notion of body consciousness can, I think, help us in not just understanding this state, but also treating. So when you ask these people, why do you want to get your limb amputated? I mean, does it not? It doesn't belong to you. So they would say, no, it over belongs to me. It is intruding.
Intruding.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. These are the exact words. I'm not even paraphrasing. Okay. So this is as regards body consciousness. And the third point I would like to share is as regards mental consciousness.
Okay.
And this is a well-known phenomenon. This is a case of cutting the corpus callosum. Like in people who have chronic pain, when nothing else works, physicians go for cutting the corpus callosum, which connects our two hemispheres, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere.
Okay.
Now, and so there is no connection between the two hemispheres.
Okay.
So if you ask one part of the brain, this is an actual experiment. A neuroscientist asked one part left hemisphere, are you a theist? And the left hemisphere said yes. And the neuroscientist asks the right hemisphere, are you theist? And
theist?
Theist. And the right hemisphere gave complete opposite answer. Right? So if you flash key ring on a computer screen for 1/10 of a second and ask the left hemisphere to pick the object that it saw, the left hemisphere would pick the ring, whereas the right hemisphere, when you ask it to pick the object that it saw, the right hemisphere, it would pick the key.
How do you ask the hemispheres now?
It's easy. So for the left hemisphere can talk because there is an area in the left hemisphere called the Broca's area that allows us to articulate speech. So left hemisphere can talk. Right hemisphere, you give them options on computer screen. So right hemisphere can read, and you give them options like, are you, let's say for instance, are you a male or are you female? So first option male, second option female, and then the right hemisphere can indicate whatever it wants to say with the left hand, because right hemisphere controls the left part of the body. So could we, one question is, what's going on in this case? Could we say that there are two realms of mental consciousness
are functioning like different mental consciousnesses becoming active depending on right or left side?
Yes, and I would like to reiterate what I said in the beginning, which is that science does not, at this point in time, have complete explanatory accounts of, number one, how these things and what is going on in these cases, and number two, how we can go about treating these cases. And the first place, the notion of sense consciousness, the second place, the notion of body, and the third one, mental consciousness, can make real contributions, I feel.
Well, I think there needs to be a lot more research, of course, and it's a little bit harder, of course, because it's usually individual experiences when it comes to the Buddhist explanation, whereas in science you have something physical you can show for. But I agree, and that's happening right now with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and many scientists coming together, and also other lamas. So yeah, great, this is very helpful. I just had this thought about, what about multiple personality disorder?
Yeah.
That is such an interesting phenomenon, isn't it? Especially when the person, the alter ego or the other person, one person needs glasses and the other one doesn't, right? There's some cases where when one person is present, the person needs very thick glasses, and in the other case, can't see with the glasses. That is an interesting idea. Again, what type of awarenesses are present in that person? So these extreme examples, I think they're very helpful. And yeah, I think both systems can learn from each other. And do right now. Yeah. Thank you very much for that, Bao. Okay. Oh my God! This took up like 10 minutes now. So if you don't mind, let me think about this. Go through it. So I thought it was more like a comment you had to make, and so I didn't even think of a response or anything with the eye consciousness. I'll think about it. I remember the blind spot. Remind me, the body consciousness is like, the arm, and I need to also read up on it. Definitely I need to read up on this, yeah. And then the last part, okay. So you've all heard this, give it some thought, and maybe you come up with some idea, and then I address it eventually. Yes, Nikita.
So I have two questions. One is, like, even in our study group, as in a discussion group, we have witnessed that a disconnect between your body and your mind. Like even for myself, like I'll miss out, if I want to write can't, I'll write can, or I'll just miss out an entire word. And when we read the sentence, it's like you're reading the whole sentence again, like as is. And a lot of people say it's because your mind works too fast. What does that mean? Is that the answer? And if so, what does that mean?
It's a very interesting phenomenon that you describe, where you actually know what you want is this, but you do something else, right? Or sometimes you gave the order to do something, and then suddenly you see, no, that was a mistake, and you want to change it, but you can't. It's already doing its thing. So there's some interesting phenomena. Or sometimes you write something, and it's like, where does that come from? I didn't write that, but you did. I think personally that there are so many awarenesses that come one after the other. So too fast? Well, maybe too fast in the sense that other minds can pop up and also influence our actions, but there's no real awareness of these other minds. I mean, since there is no separate self, there is no separate I that watches our mind. When we say, I watch my own mind, I'm labeling I on the basis of a certain mind that watches a certain other mind. Right? The mind is merely labeled on the basis of certain parts of the mind or certain body parts. So when my hand writes, I label I on the hand that's writing. There is no other I that's writing. And then when I say I think, well, a particular mind is thinking, so I label I'm thinking. When I say I meditate, I'm labeling I'm meditating. And we have this beautiful, sophisticated mind, and there's not a single mind that's in charge. And that's supported, I've been told, by neuroscientists who used to believe in the past that there was some control center in the brain, but that was never found. Now they're just different parts that very, very harmoniously work with one another. And there's not a single part that is in charge. So with our mind, it's similar. They're just different awarenesses, and they all coordinate and work very well together. But there are some that are slower. There are some where other minds are more aware of. So we can say, I'm aware of those minds. And there are those minds that pop up quickly due to habits or whatever are the reasons for that. And they may influence us, but we don't even, there's no other mind that is aware of them. So it slips our attention. We're like, where does that come from? But there was definitely an awareness in that moment. Like, for instance, to give you an example, you know, when you're very good at driving a car, when you've had your driving license, you've been driving for enough years, you can drive your car and have a fight with the person next to you really well, right? It goes really well. Maybe have a phone call in the middle of it, or plan your shopping. So there are all these awarenesses that can work together. So sometimes you don't know how you got home in your car. You know the way, and suddenly you're like, oh, I'm home. Well, you were driving the car.
Doesn't it just mean that you are not aware of what you are doing?
Exactly. Actually, there's just there is a mind that controls the driving. There must have been. And it goes in and out. It goes in and out. So you switch between arguing, which is very pronounced, and you take longer seconds. And then every now and then, there's a brief moment of that, right? It slips in. But it's pretty brief. So it's like driving, you know, if you have gears and so forth, or you have to turn to the left now and whatever, you like when you drive home, right, left, and so forth. So you don't need to think, as in like you do think, but it's so quick and it's so habitual that there's no effort required. Okay, I mean even walking, you don't require an effort to walk. But I heard of this man who has some disorder. And he, because of his disorder, when he walks, he has to think. He has to, like a child that walks for the first time, lift your left foot, then put it down. And so there's a documentary about him, or at least a part of a documentary about him, where it follows him. He's usually in a wheelchair because it's too tiring for him to walk. Why? Because all his effort needs to be directed at him walking. He can't look left and right, he falls over. He can't think of something else, he falls over. So all this effort is required for him to work, because whatever is responsible in our case that makes it habitual to walk is missing in his case. So therefore, it comes effortlessly. And when it comes effortlessly, we talk about it as automatic or autopilot. And at some point, we no longer notice, because the effort is noticeable. But if it's effortless, we're no longer aware of it. And since we get bored easily, we try to entertain ourselves. Maybe have a fight with the person next to us, or or an argument, or joke around, what have you. Because now your mind, that which we're really aware of, then takes place at the same time. So we do so many things automatically, and we're not aware we're doing them. The fact that you sit like that right now, that requires an effort. It requires, an awareness, but you're not aware of that.
But in a situation like this, my question is that if I say that I want to write, I can't do this, and I can.
Yes, you have two conflicting awarenesses.
Right.
Can't is the stronger one. You start writing, but then it becomes inattentive in that moment. The can slips in, that you're less aware of, and before you know, you may be thinking again of something else. It goes back and forth, and now the one that wishes for you to write can, it's just more effortless in that moment, and so suddenly it's there.
Would you say that's more like what's actually going on with you?
No, it's just another mind that, due to habituation, I mean, we've all had that experience. You think of something else and suddenly something bizarre happens. Like, you're actually in the process of doing something, and then you think of something else, you're not really aware, you're distracted, and suddenly it's before you even know, right? So there's no introspection. That sense of introspection is totally gone in that moment, and it seems to be automatic. I don't know how else to explain it, but just watch your own mind, and sometimes after a while you can you get a glimpse of that mind that was there, and you know where it comes from. You know why you misspoke. Sometimes I say something, I wanted to say something else, and I say something different, and I was like, what? And my friends look at me like, what are you, right? I think of something in Germany, and suddenly German comes out. And so my friend goes like, I don't understand you. And I'm like, why don't you understand me? And she's like, I don't speak German. And I said, I spoke English. She's like, no, you spoke German. I didn't even know I spoke German. But then I go back and I think, what? And there was this tiny moment when maybe I thought of something reminded me, and my mind switched back into German, and I said a word, and that was it. And I went back, and I never even noticed.
What about the missing words? Like, and it's not only these, a lot of people who do it as well. In like a sentence, they pretty much miss out. Like,
well, sometimes you think it, and forget to pass on the order, if you like, to write it down. So in your mind, you've maybe already gone through writing it, but you never did.
But I mean, considering that this is like, I would say, something that's happening more and more, is there anything that you could do to actually make sure that you write it?
Be mindful. The answer is mindfulness. The answer really is mindfulness. So Nikita, I can't tell in every moment why something happened and didn't happen. I can only take my own example. To slow down is a good idea. It comes down to that, because the faster we are, the harder it is to be mindful. So to slow down in our activities, do whatever. So multitasking, I've been told or I've heard, is not recommended. Because when we multitask, we never multitask. We just very quickly switch back and forth. And oftentimes we're not able to fully and mindfully complete one task when we do all three together. So it's probably not a bad idea. When you do one thing, you leave everything else aside and do what you do mindfully, and then those mistakes don't occur. So the answer would be mindfulness.
And this is the second one, I should just say universal one.
Okay, that's it. Sorry, 10 minutes out. Can you wait? Can you wait for the next? Right, you'll have an opportunity next time.
I thought it would just benefit a lot of people here.
Then it'll benefit them next time. Sorry, I just want to be fair and everyone gets their time. Okay, we'll do it next time. Yes?
Our group were discussing the potential of anger.
Sorry, Nikita, you can also ask Venerable Jorma or the Venerable ones who have studied before. Desi has too. There are many people who've studied before. If I don't know you, I can't say how much you've learned, but I know Desi, M, you have Kate, those three. Definitely you can also ask them too. Yeah. Okay, Betsy, go ahead.
We were talking about the potential
Maya and Nikita.
of anger being a right consciousness.
Pardon?
Of anger, can anger be a right consciousness?
No.
Because we had the what do you think about this situation?
Yes.
Alright, I could either use one like someone is attacking me and I push them off me.
Yeah.
I'm angry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's another one, say, a woman, someone comes to me, sexually assault me.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And I push them off.
Okay.
Angry.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
And I mean, on a conventional level, that's a relatively appropriate thing to do.
Yes.
So.
Well, anger, you see, if in that moment you didn't exaggerate the negativity, it's just not called anger. I said, anger has a counterpart that is not exaggerating. So you can say, this is not okay, I need to do something. That's not anger. You see, forceful action is not necessarily the result of anger. It can be out of love. So you have to it's only, what do we call anger? A mind that is a wrong consciousness that exaggerates. That's it. So if that's what anger is, what you describe is just not called anger. And it's necessary. If there's an injustice done, to be decisive about it. You know, like when you read about Lojong, there's this like take the victory, accept the loss and give the victory to the other. That's just mental. That's not saying you may not get the person and maybe discipline them for what they've done. So it shouldn't be out of anger. It should be out of concern for that person. If you feel this benefits the other person, even though they don't like it in that moment, like with children. I'm not saying we're like children, but you know, we love children. Children make mistakes, as we do too, but it's our responsibility to discipline them. So then when they do something wrong, we may say, no, that's enough, don't do that. It doesn't have to come out of a place of anger. It can come out of love and compassion. So you wouldn't call it anger, although it seems to be anger.
But if it's the scenario where we are on the same group, so we had that.
Yes.
But if the scenario is that it is not out of love and compassion,
Uh-huh.
so somebody is sexually harassing me, yes, the love and compassion is not
It's not there.
present.
No. But it's just the thought, it's not okay.
If it is accurate, my response,
Yes.
so it's not called anger.
If the way you perceive this person is not exaggerated and the negativity is not exaggerated, then it's okay. Then it's okay. Then it's an appropriate response. So even without love and compassion, just saying the action is wrong. This should not happen. Like I said, you're not saying the person is horrible in that moment. You're actually saying the action is wrong. I'm trying to avoid this. That's it. So, but this is where mindfulness comes in, to check, but don't be too worried about it. Oh my God, was this anger? It's like you start off with those moments of anger where you know they're there. So it's not like I'm not saying stop anger. From now on, no more anger. That's impossible. So there are subtle moments of anger where it's not directly obvious to us whether it's anger or not. Right? And so we just need to be careful. We need to be careful. Something comes to mind right now, and this was Geshe Thupten Palsang. He was once asked, and I think it's a brilliant answer. Sometimes someone does something that's not okay, and people wonder, can I criticize another person? Right? This is a very tricky one with criticism. Because actually there's constructive criticism, and that is very important. It may be painful for the person in that moment, but it's still important. So we need to train ourselves that when we criticize that person, we don't become angry, because we have a habit. When we start criticizing, we may be very calm, but because we're used to, when we're criticizing someone, we get angry, automatically anger may come in. If we know for sure this doesn't happen, we can also criticize someone. So to just be very careful with our own mind, to watch our own mind. And if we are in a situation, and you're not saying that, but you're not describing that as an example, but also sometimes not in the spur of the moment, but even later on, to go up to someone, am I being able to control myself? And to what extent? So maybe a little bit anger rises, that's okay if it helps the person, but if it turns into full-blown anger and we have a fist fight in the end, well, better to avoid. So I think what's important is to just first get to know your own anger, and don't hate yourself when you got hateful. That's also something very, very Buddhist thing to do. Oh, I'm so angry. I'm really angry with myself because I'm angry. Don't redirect your anger instead of directing it at others. You direct it. It's like when we come to Buddhism, sometimes we have this problem that we want to be perfect from the first day onwards, and that's impossible. And I'm saying that out of my own experience. I'm not saying you do this. I did this, right? Especially in the beginning, I wanted to do it right? German, right? So, like, I didn't do it well, and I was like, oh, I'm so terrible. I mean, that was another extreme. To be accepting. Of course we make mistakes, and do as much as you can. But those more extreme moments, you'll know when it's anger, when you get more used to them. And in those moments, it's not... But be careful, because it's easy to justify moments where you just want to really... And you're like, I wasn't really angry, I just did it out of compassion or whatever. So that we need to also be... Because our mind is very tricky. Okay? Okay, great. Yes?
I just want to add to the anger
Please.
part.
Mm-hmm.
That in martial arts... and
In martial arts, yeah.
Yeah, they say that you don't have to be angry to hit a person. The intensity of hitting a person can increase when you're not angry and you're more focused.
Oh. You can hit harder without anger. So it's a
Without
good...
anger.
Yes, okay. Well, yeah, it kind of makes sense. Anger is exhausting, so...
Yeah, it takes away, limits your power.
It limits your power, okay.
Well, martial arts also says never attack, always defend.
Always defend yourself.
Never attack.
Okay, never attack. And actually, I mean, even if it doesn't come out of deep love and compassion, if someone attacks you, they're basically harming themselves. So to stop that person from harming themselves, even if it doesn't feel like love and compassion, but you're stopping another person. Like sometimes, when you see people, they're like, suddenly they start kicking and screaming, and your automatic response is just hold on to them. It's not necessarily this deep love and compassion in that moment. It's just they're hurting themselves. That's not okay. And you hold on to them. So it could be a similar response that you describe when someone attacks you. You defend yourself in that way without any hatred. That's good. I don't think there's a problem with that. Yes. Someone who hasn't said something is pretty much equal. It's okay? You did say...
Mine was just a comment on anger.
Just a comment on anger. Then go ahead.
I think it was in the Bodhicharya Avtara when they say that when you are being fierce with someone, to stop them from creating negative karma, then you're actually being compassionate.
In that way, it's a compassionate act if you stop them from creating negative action, right? Which you would do in that moment, even though it doesn't come out of bodhicitta, for instance. Does that make sense? Yes?
Okay, I'm going to add my comment.
Yes.
So it's people who have experience working with people having some mental disabilities, like they're big kids. They know in their job that probably daily they're going to have to take a punch. But there's not this aspect of taking it personal. So they know at the first when you first do this job, it's a bit like, but then it goes because the person is just, if there's something in his routine that hasn't changed, that's it, they go berserk. But to the person who received the punch, and even from the puncher, they are not the same motivation. So you see it's the same actions, the motivations, the action itself and the results are completely different. Because the mind is set up in another level.
Very good.
It's not towards you.
It's nothing personal. Exactly. That's a very good point. So if you're in that line of work where you deal with people, this is also what Chanti Deva said, like a Bodhicharya Tara, would you be angry if your own mother got mentally crazy or something, like lost her mind? Would you be angry? Because there's still that love, but she can't help it, or your dad can't help it. So then if you're in that line of work, this is one of the great lines of work, really very important work. But to also, if you can, then also generate love. Wow, how effective. You punch someone and make a very positive action. Right? And you have to punch them sometimes, or you have to restrain them at least. Or sometimes, have you ever seen when another person is drowning and someone tries to help them and they pull the person down that tried to help them, they're just holding on to them? You have to hit them in the face. It looks terrible, but you save their life with that, your own and their life.
Got an amazing example of that.
Amazing example. No time for the amazing.
It can be like 1 minute.
1 minute, or 1 minute.
So after a particular bout of being attacked for a prolonged period of time, and basically calming this person down, we sat in the room and he took my hand, and then he just stroked my hand, and he was like, there was blood, and he was like, sorry.
Oh,
and then he just started eating his lunch.
Okay. Good. Okay, lovely. Sorry, I couldn't take all your questions, so you'll have the opportunity next time. But then now you have 15 minutes, taking a break, and then you continue with the meditation, and I'll see you again in the morning. Okay? So some time to internalize what you've learned today. Okay. So let's do the dedication. You can do it with Dhanavadroma. Please take the 15 minutes you have. Okay. Please leave if you want to.